Welcome everyone. Welcome live from the Lok Hall in Tilburg, the award-winning public library in Tilburg. Well, it's a pity you're not here. We're here, but it's great that you're here with us online. And I hope you will actively participate tonight by posing questions, generating comments, and contributing to the debate we're going to have tonight on the EU, European Union, to be more precise, the future of the European Union. And why this event? Well, it's always good to have an event, of course, especially in these times. It's always good to share, to talk, to listen, to meet up, even if it's online. And as an academic community, we live and thrive by debate and discussion. Some food for thought, some stimulation for the brain in these challenging times. But why the EU? Well, given the importance of the EU, there can never be enough discussion and reflection on the EU. And in fact, I think, and the speakers will probably agree with me that there's not enough discussion and reflection on the EU. You only look at the elections, the parliamentary elections in the Netherlands, where the EU was hardly mentioned for all kinds of reasons. It was the elephant in the room. But the EU is an integral part of our political and administrative system, as you all know. Obviously. It's part of the multi-level system that governs us, governs our society, our economy. So we better discuss the EU and we better reflect on it. But why now? Well, it's the 6th of May. It's almost the 9th of May, and then we all celebrate this. There's big parties and everyone on the streets, and it's Europe Day. Yeah. So for those who actually knew that, Europe Day, and what do we remember, or what do we celebrate, that in 1950, on that day, Schuman, French Minister of Foreign Affairs, promulgated his declaration on Europe, on collaboration in Europe, political collaboration in Europe, beyond the member states. His ideas and ideals, and that's 71 years ago, right now, actually on Sunday. And there's also something else that's gonna formally start on Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. That's what's called the Conference on the Future of Europe. The Parliament, the Council, and the Commission have together decided on this conference. On what should the EU do in the future? What should the EU look like in the future? What should be its priorities? Perhaps also what should be its tasks and competences, because that's always part of these kinds of discussions. It's very much focused on citizens, very much focused on democracy, bottom up. In these times, it will be online, all kinds of events, and we can basically consider this event already part of that. Where we ask for your input out there somewhere in cyberspace on the future of the EU. But we've brought in some great minds, some great thinkers and practitioners on this issue. And we have here with us two speakers, which I'll introduce in a bit after I've briefly introduced myself. I'm Martijn Groenleer. I'm a professor at Tilburg University, Public Governance, and some of you may know me from a screen because I've been teaching Introduction to European Governance a couple of months ago. I'm currently teaching Transboundary and Multi-Level Governance, and I'm also the director for the master. And a lot of my research actually focuses on the EU. My PhD was on the EU, so I'm researching the EU. I think it's important, I think it's interesting, I think it's relevant, but I think we can always learn more about the EU, even if we don't, we're not necessarily Europhiles, so we don't have to become Europhiles. It's always good to, even if you think it doesn't function as it should, you should first learn something about it, and that's what we're going to do tonight. So we're going to have here Mohamed Shahim. He's sitting left on the left from me. I will introduce another speaker, Nawal Amhouch, later on. She'll join me for a second round. But let me first introduce Mohammed. Great that you're with us. Mohammed is a member of the European Parliament, Social Democrat or the Labour Party, and he's part of a big European party then of Socialists and Democrats. He actually studied in Tilburg. He's pretty clever because he studied econometrics, and these are always pretty clever people. Even though he did not manage to win the Slimste Mens, the most the smartest human being on the television show. He said it was about
I did make it to the final.
I did make it to the final, but it was a question on culture. Yeah, then. So he's a member of the European Parliament. He's also a member of various committees there. The Parliament has committees, amongst others, the Committee on Environment, Public Health, and Food Safety. If you already follow him on Twitter, if not, you can do it right now. You noticed that he was also in the news today because he's been pushing for a vaccination patent waiver, something that Biden today or yesterday actually, he indicated that the US was in favor of this, and now the EU has to follow. But that Mohammed did a lot of the preparatory work there.
I'm pretty sure he read my op-ed in the Volkskrant.
Probably it was, probably it was that.
Finally was convinced.
And so we can talk about that a bit, but we can also talk about, and that's why we asked you tonight, is your work on the European Green Deal. You are going to be one of the vice presidents of the Green Deal, and you're going to first tell us a bit about your work, about the Green Deal, about what it is that you do for a living. And then there's the opportunity for us, for you out there, to pose questions about Mohammed's work, everything you want to know. In relation to also this debate about the future of Europe, the European Green Deal, is that is that a priority for the EU? Should the EU spend its time on this? But let's first listen to Mohammed. Thanks again. Your floor is yours.
Okay, so let me introduce myself a little bit more briefly. So I'm Mohammed Shaheen, 35 years old, studied indeed in Tilburg. I did my bachelor and master, double master here in Tilburg, and I did a PhD. I finished, I think, in 2013, and parallel to that, I became a member of the city council, starting when I was 21, up to, I did that for 14 years approximately, so it started as something that I was interesting to do, but I never expected that I would do it for 14 years. And starting July 2019, I became a member of the European Parliament. And today I'm the vice president of the Socialists and Democrats group. It's the second largest group after the European People's Party, the equivalent of the Christian Democrats here in the Netherlands. I'm basically involved in the environmental committee, as you explained, but also the industry and energy committee, and I'm, as a vice president, responsible for the European Green Deal, which covers transport, agriculture, fishery, environment, industry, energy, all these type of committees. And before I became a member of parliament, I was a scientist at the Dutch Institute for Applied Scientific Research, also in the field of energy transition, circular economy. So basically I try to combine scientific facts with political incentives. I think on the European Green Deal, I've prepared a small introduction. Do not know whether this is time also to look at why or at what level Europe has to, I think, assess certain problems, and I was asked to look at the energy transition. So if I may, I will just start.
The floor is yours.
Okay. So I think when it comes to the energy transition, it's very simple, because we have 29 years to shift from emitting 51 billion tons of greenhouse gases to basically 0 a year. So that's basically what's on the table. And to put it a little bit on perspective, in the Netherlands we emit 180 million tons of CO2. So there's a big gap. So we said within the Paris climate deal that in 2050 we would like to see a climate neutral world. And for us, as we are one of the first continents in the world that have decided to put that in law. So 2 weeks ago there was a compromise in the European Parliament where the Council, the European Council, the European Commission, together with the Parliament, have made a compromise related to the European, to the climate law, which in a couple of weeks I think will become a directive from a European perspective, which means that every European country will be upheld by that law. And that means that we are geographically the largest region where we have created a law where we made the targets of the Paris Agreement binding. What the effect will be, of course, when countries do not fulfill those promises, we have to see. But probably what will happen is that citizens will more often, as has happened in the Netherlands, as has happened in Germany, will sue their government to make sure that the plans are on the table, to make sure that the Paris agreements will be upheld. And I do believe that when we look at the greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, that the European level is approximately the smallest size to be effective when tackling climate change. And therefore I do believe that the European level is the level where we should discuss these type of legislation. And I have two reasons for that. First of all, the EU has just enough impact to lead by example on one way, but on the other way also incentivize other states to follow, or even enforce other states to follow. And I will give you one example later on with one of these legislations that we are thinking about that can maybe incentivize other countries to basically copy our way or our ambitions. And we should not forget that the EU has a very large consumer market. And basically, at the end of the day, the customer decides. If we set certain standards to our producers, then at the end, producers will try at least to fulfill those standards. But on a global level, the European market is that big that we can really shift changes on a global level. The second one is we have an internal market. So it doesn't make any sense to have certain laws in the Netherlands or ambitions in the Netherlands. Let's say in the Netherlands we'll stop selling internal combustion engines. And we have an internal market, so I can go to Germany, buy one, and drive with it in the Netherlands. There's no one that, I mean, there are some municipalities that can create local laws where they can prohibit some certain things, but it's very complex to organize that. So I think the second reason is this internal market where you together decide on product standards, product classifications, but also emission standards, etc. I think it's very complex to have national differences, so therefore I believe that we have to tackle that on a European level. So, as I said, the European Green Deal, one of the fundamentals is of course the climate law, but the climate law on itself is just a law. So if we really want to make sure that we hit those targets, we have to also think about three fundamental pillars that I believe are on the base of the European Green Deal. The first one is about policies and strategic policies. So, for example, we've created a lot of policies around biodiversity, circular economy, wind offshore, industry policy, agriculture policies. We've looked at strategic plans around, we call it farm to fork strategy. So this is one pillar. What kind of ideas, strategies do we think of are necessary to fulfill the European Green Deal? The second pillar is about financing. We've looked at the EU Next Generation Fund. We've looked at the resilient, and the RRF, so the plans to tackle the COVID-19 crisis. We have the European Investment Bank. So basically, we've created a lot of financing structures around how we, at the end, make sure that these plans that we've created can become reality. And then we have a third pillar where we look at legislation and pricing. Those are basically the market mechanism. How can you make sure that, for example, companies automatically become more sustainable due to for example, by pricing carbon and increasing that price year after year. By, for example, also creating new product standards. For example, now we have cars that can emit, on average, a car manufacturer can have a car fleet that emits 95 grams of CO2 per kilometer. We are basically improving these standards year by year. In a couple of years, that will be 60 grams per kilometer, and then maybe after 2030, it will be 40 grams. So basically, you force manufacturers to improve their technology, and with that, also decrease the number of CO2 that they are emitting. That's basically the fundament of the European Green Deal. So quickly, the question that I was asked to, do we have to tackle with the energy crisis, the climate crisis at the EU level? The question is yes. And I've explained a little bit how we are thinking about reaching that target in 2050. And then there's one piece of legislation that I want to look at from a specific point of view as an example. That's the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. I do not know whether you've heard of it, but a lot of discussion or a lot of criticism is coming from industry about the European Green Deal, where they state that the level of ambition is increasing in the EU, but we are not protected by unfair competition outside the EU. And basically, there are even some politicians that state we have to protect our industry because else they will just move away. There's even a term created around this. It's called carbon leakage. Although there's no scientific evidence ever, any empirical scientific evidence that shows that carbon leakage has existed. But anyway, to make sure that we protect our industry, we will come with this new mechanism. We call it mechanism because if we use the word tax, then member states will become a bit dizzy because formally fiscalities are a member state competence. That's why they've called it mechanism. But the idea is that if you produce outside the EU, and given the fact that European producers have to pay for their emitted CO2, that's unfair. Hence, if you import your products or you want to export your products from outside the EU into the EU, you have to pay a carbon tax, relatively comparable to the tax that European companies are paying, or you have to show that you at least produce in the same manner as we are doing and have the same ambitions as we are having in the EU. So use as sustainable as possible production methods, etc., to be able to enter the market, and again, the second largest consumer market in the world. This mechanism not only protects our industry and not only makes sure that we can implement the higher level of ambition, but we also have basically a tool to incentivize countries and producers outside Europe to also join our plans and our ambitions to make sure that as a world, globally, we try to fulfill the Paris Agreement as fast as possible. And that's also one of the reasons I believe that when we look at the energy transition, when we look at climate change, that European level is exactly the level where we should make sure that these type of plans are created and implemented. And that's my introduction.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, if there are already burning questions, do let me know. Then I'll transfer them to you.
One.
You already have one? Yeah. Go ahead. We're
Is it working? Is the mic on? Okay, we had a question from Chris. He asked, what will be the EU's biggest challenge regarding the energy transition?
The biggest challenge. I do believe that this challenge is not only specific to the EU, and now I'm a bit talking like as a scientist, not necessarily as a politician.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at the energy transition, then if I look at the energy mix that we are having now, then approximately 20% of the energy that we're using, I call it electricity, energy in electric form. So and 80% I call it like energy atoms. So basically something like gas or oil, something non-electric. And when you look at the sustainability share or share of sustainable electricity, that's basically, that technology is already okay. We know how we can produce sustainable energy. But when it comes to electric atoms, it's a little bit more difficult. So electric molecules, sorry. So the one is electrons and the other is molecules. There it's a bit more difficult. So the idea is that in 2050, approximately 50 to 60% of our energy system is electrified. So we still have a problem with 40 to 50% of our energy system. And there we are now coming up with alternatives like hydrogen or ammonia or biofuels. But in order to produce enough of these sustainable fuels to really create alternatives, for example, for flying, but also for maritime transport, we need some big steps, not only from an innovation point of view, but also to make sure that if we have enough of these type of products, enough of these type of energy resources, also to implement them in our chemical industry, but also in our heavy industry, to make sure that those sectors can also be sustainable. I think that's the biggest problem when it comes to the energy transition.
And that's very much approached from almost a technical, technological perspective.
Yes.
If you would approach it, let's first approach it from a more political perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You referred to the climate law,
Yes.
right? Being a directive. So now all the students know
yes.
it's a directive, so it's not a regulation.
It's not a regulation.
So what does it mean? Member states need to implement this, right?
Yes.
What does that mean? Differences among European countries in terms of how they implement
Sorry,
it.
it's a regulation.
It is a regulation.
No, it's the other way around.
So
sorry.
solve that.
It's a regulation. They have to implement it exactly how it is. So it's not.
Okay,
so
so
they
that's
don't
good
have
to
an
hear.
no,
So that's
it's a
that's
directive.
important. So we've established
Regulation,
that.
sorry, again.
It's a regulation. But even if it's a regulation, then it means countries have to do something. In the Netherlands, at the national level, provinces have to do something.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Cities have to do something. So, from Brussels, I assume you have thought about this, and so how do you think this is going to play out on the ground, right? So politically, will you? How you going to experience support? Will you see resistance? This is also going to be pretty costly in terms of changing around things. So
I mean, change always comes with resistance, and when you have a battle, the last people that resist are also the ones that are quite fanatic.
Mm-hmm.
Although, if I look at industry, then they basically tell us, give us the climate law, give us clear objectives and clear regulations, because I mean, industry is going way faster than some of the politicians think. I can give you an example. Frans Timmermans launched this plan of a hydrogen economy in the EU, where we looked at, okay, in 2030 we want to have a 2 times 40 gigawatt electrolyzers capacity, which is huge. Just imagine the biggest electrolyzers plant in the EU are 10 megawatt, and we want to have almost 400 times, almost 400 times that capacity in 2030. In the EU, and then also outside the EU for the EU. And these plans are not even finished yet. And what we've seen, that there's a private consortium in Spain that already promised 60 gigawatt electrolyzer capacity before 2030, and without needing any support of the government. So while we are still debating in Parliament whether we should have 55% decrease in CO2 or 65 or 60% decrease, or when should we ban the internal combustion engine? Will that be 2030 or 2035? And then you'll have the right-wing parties saying, no, please give us 5 more years. We see that industry is really looking at us and thinking, listen, just give us clear conditions and basically we'll go as fast as the market wants. Could we envision 10 years ago that more than 50% of the cars sold in the Netherlands today are electric? In the EU, I think more than 20% of the new sold cars is electric. It's going way faster than we as politicians sometimes can imagine. Then we are the issue in this sustainability change, not the industry. I think the industry needs a government that gives them clear targets and, where needed, basically pays the difference between making an investment. Companies invest in technologies when they see a return on investment, and sometimes, especially when you have this change, there is no return on investment. And I think that what's the English word? The onrendabele top. How do you say it? Like the part of an. How can I formulate this? Sometimes we need to invest in technologies that are not cost effective yet, but can become cost effective in the future. Firms, industry asked us to do that. And basically, if we become a co-investor sometimes for certain technologies, we clear away all the hiccups, all the reasons not to go sustainable. And the second reason is we should not forget that the doing nothing scenario is really hard to explain, because it's like, when we have COVID-19, the government has a certain condition or a certain measure, and then the measure is felt as very, very, very severe. Think about the lockdown, and then after a couple of weeks, people say, well, the number of casualties was okay. Maybe the measure was a little bit too much. So it's very hard to imagine if we don't do anything scenario. If we don't do anything, I can tell you there will be several companies that will go bankrupt, because there will be a moment that gas and oil will be too expensive. If we do nothing, will it be affordable to heat your house in a couple of years? Will there be energy poverty? Will there be some people that cannot afford to basically have home heating? These are the scenarios that we want to tackle. We want to make sure that the climate transition is a just transition, not only for our people, but also for our industry. Because at the end of the day, without an industry, we don't have any jobs, we don't have any added value, and that's also not a future that I would like to envision.
Mm-hmm. I do have a question about that. Yes. Just transition, but I'm just checking with Max here. There's probably questions.
We have a question from Rudolf. Won't the carbon mechanism you propose just drive up the price of products for citizens here in the EU?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the effects thereof, and this is also, that's related to my question. This is a transition, costs money. Mm-hmm. We have to be honest about it. Yes. A lot of the times when we have those transitions, there's already inequality, and they can actually increase inequality. Yes. So it may drive up prices, and particularly for people who already have not much to spend, yes, or etc. So maybe you can.
I love this question because I always try to go back to the facts. I had a debate in the parliament where I stated that I looked at how much CO2 tax are we paying as consumers, and I compared that to how much a big firm or a medium and small size firm is paying per ton CO2. Because this information is publicly available. The OECD makes a yearly analysis on our energy taxes, and what I see is that the energy transition is already paid by us, normal people. We pay approximately 200 euros per ton CO2, where the average company pays 15 euros per ton CO2. Is that fair? And if I tell people, if we have a CO2 tax directly to companies and they increase prices, I mean, that's fair if they do that. But that's a difference between all of us paying or me having a choice by paying when I consume. That's the difference, because now we all pay. And in the second example, we pay when we consume. And basically the polluter pays principle, whether it's on a micro level or on a macro level, I think is a fair condition or a principle. The second thing is, what we are looking at now in the European Parliament is, we are looking at how we can make this transition a bit more fair for normal consumers. And we're looking at maybe earmarking part of the revenues of the CO2 taxes and give it back to people. There's now in Switzerland and in Canada, there are experiments, pilots, where they call it the carbon dividend or carbon income. So basically part of the carbon income, the CO2 income that companies pay, are directly paid back to consumers. Basically, every month you'll get a share of the revenues of the CO2 tax. And there are some analysis already done by some economists that show that up to the 70th percentile income group, people will have an improvement on their income, which is interesting for me as a social democrat.
Yeah,
It's redistribution of wealth.
Indeed, it is. Other questions, Max, or no, not for now. You referred to the EU level being most suited here to, construct an EU deal. But what do you expect from the national level, from in the Netherlands, the provincial, the regional, the local level, in order to make this work? Because there's a climate law, but that's so much. There's several mechanisms, instruments, funds put in place. But what is necessary from all these other parties, actors in that system?
Yeah, so I mean, there will be sectoral plans also from a European level, but also from a national level. But there's this regulation that's called the effort sharing regulation, which basically allocates the European 2050 target to a member state level. So the 55% decrease of CO2 in 2030 will be translated into Denmark will have a target of 70%, Poland, because their industry is a bit different, it has a different dependence on fossil fuels than, for example, the Netherlands. So we translate that based on the industry characteristics, but also on the GDP per capita. And there will be targets on sustainable energy, the share of sustainable energy in every country. So, I mean, I was talking to Diederik Samson, and he said, basically what we're trying to do is, normally when you have a group of sheep and you have a dog that herds them, I think, then normally one dog is sufficient to place them to get them from one place to another. Here we have a group of cats, and in order to control a group of cats, you need to have control from the sides, from above. You need a lot of things moving around at the same time, and then hopefully you'll get from A to B. That's basically what we're now doing with the Green Deal.
So, and the cats are the member states and
the
all
member
these other
states, industry, us as consumers, that all have different demands and ideas and plans.
And who are herding the cats here? Or
so the herding is basically making sure that you. Sometimes you can you have to incentivize them.
But who's doing that? Is that, do you see?
I mean, we are Europe. There's I mean, this idea that Europe is like an invisible hand that controls us. Wake up! We are Europe. People like me that are elected by people like you. I don't know whether you voted for my party, but we are Europe.
A lot of people did that.
And there's more transparency in Europe. I can assure you than there is in many member states. Before a commissioner is elected or is appointed, we have public hearings, and there are many commissioners that fail. Have you ever looked at a public hearing on ministers in the Netherlands or in many other countries? We really have a transparent system, and when there's legislation coming from Europe, I can assure you the Dutch representative of the government, whether it's the prime minister or a minister or a secretary of state, has been sitting on the table. There's never been legislation coming from the EU where a government hasn't approved it. Never. We are co-legislators. But it's really funny that I see many politicians from on the national level having one face in the EU, sitting down with us, having a compromise and accepting the deal as it was, and then the day they go back to their member state, have a different face, have a different tone, that adds on this negativity surrounding the EU. But wake up, the EU is not an invisible hand. You and me, we are the EU as much as the EU is part of us.
Yeah. So let me check whether
it's
any
a bit of my frustration, huh?
Yeah, no. It is, but this is I think it's crucial, and this is why I asked you about.
Yeah.
So what do you expect from the member states, right? So you would expect leadership not only from the Commission,
but also
Europe,
from
but
the member states.
from the Parliament, but from the member states. So you'd expect ministers, prime ministers in the Netherlands and other countries to say, well, okay, this is our mission, this is what we are.
And solidarity among themselves.
That's actually interesting because I think as part of the Future of Europe debate, there was a special Eurobarometer question, and I think in the Netherlands, what was one of the most given answers about what an important topic would be was solidarity. I had not expected it from Dutch, not from Dutch politicians perhaps, but the answers were given by Dutch citizens.
Yeah.
So this was interesting actually. Solidarity was so we need to focus on solidarity within the EU.
Yeah.
So you referred to this a bit when talking about the just transition and so on. Nowadays, energy, climate, and so on, also very much split societies. Look at the Netherlands, but also in other societies. On the one hand, you say, well, there's facts, there's figures, there's the technology, there's what we can do with companies. At the same time, there's society, there's people for whom this is quite difficult to comprehend. And then it's relatively easy also for national ministers and so on to say, well, that's all. Let's blame the EU.
It's too
right?
much.
So how can we get out of that circle?
Yeah. So for me, I mean, if I talk to my friends that are skeptical when it comes to climate change, I always tell them, listen, even if climate change is fake, there are always there are also other reasons to go for this. Why? Currently, we are depending on more than 60% for our energy consumption from countries like Russia, Saudi Arabia. I mean, these are not the countries you want to depend on, especially when you want to question them on human rights. And basically, we're now building a pipeline to be much more depending on Putin than we are already now. I'm actually against this.
Nord Stream,
Yeah, when we look at the energy transition, when we look at the technologies that are on the table, I mean, we can be way less depending on countries outside Europe than we are doing now. So that's already a big reason to do it. Second, many of the measures that we are thinking of are about using your energy more efficiently. How can you be against that? I mean, you can still buy a car from the 1800s and then drive 1 mile on 5 gallons. If you want that, if you are so proud of old technologies, but then I think you're silly, because more efficient cars have been made on and on and on. So it's also about showing intelligence as a society, improving technologies, being more efficient and effective as consumers, but also as producers. I mean, these are also major reasons to be positive on this transition. And a last one is, if I look at the state of the art of several sectors in the EU, then I do believe that this transition is also an opportunity to make them lead technology-wise again, to make them state of the art again. If I look at how we produce steel nowadays, then the steel produced in India and in China is less CO2 intense, Why? Because we kept our industry lazy. There was an analysis a couple of weeks ago about the Dutch industry that also compared to other EU countries, we have a higher CO2 footprint. Why is that? Why are certain companies producing, for example, plastics in other countries less CO2 intense than our industry? Because they are not that sector that improves itself. So I also look at the energy transition as an opportunity to become state of the art again, to lead the world technology-wise. And those are all arguments that have no relation with climate change, but only about how we produce in a better way, in a more efficient way, basically in the best way, so we can lead the world again technology-wise.
Okay, thank you. Max, question?
Yes, we have a question. How do you feel the increasing popularity of populist parties across Europe will affect European climate policy?
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, basically following up on our discussion, is it?
Again, I think the populist parties use populist arguments to basically not always tell the honest story, but I accept that. That's their style. I really believe that if we achieve in making this transition a bottom-up transition, where today I was visiting Rotterdam, an organization. They're called Beroepentuinen, and basically they do two things, and I was really inspired by them. They basically educate people, also long-term unemployed people, to start a career in the energy transition, basically as a solar panel installer, etc. And then they do a second thing. They make sure that when they have an energy transition plan on a neighborhood level, they educate people from that neighborhood. They set up a company. Basically, one of the companies that they talked about was called what was it? The Wijk Energiebedrijf. So which I love. It's a social entrepreneurship where they, with the people from the neighborhood, basically are involved and insulate housing, making them more energy efficient. And basically they earn also. They basically also earn from this transition. So this transition not only becomes how do you say that, like a top-down forced upon them, but they become part of that transition and they can benefit from it. I think if we can make sure that the new technologies become more cost-effective than the current ones, and in that transition period, we will not be there directly. I think people don't care whether they come to Tilburg by car, by a petrol car or a gasoline car or an electric car. If it's affordable, they will go for the most affordable technology. So I also believe that many of the changes will become automatic. So people become automatically sustainable if the best affordable or the cheapest choice is the most sustainable one. And then the change will happen automatically, and it will not be a politicized debate anymore.
Okay, thank you. I suggest we have a short break.
Yes.
And then we continue also what this means for the future of Europe later on. We have a 5-minute break, I think. 10 minute break. So comfort break. We'll see you back in 10 minutes from now with a new guest speaker sitting next to me. So see you in 10 minutes, sharp. Welcome back. Still live from the Log Hall in Tilburg. Still me, but with another speaker. We have on my right here, your left, Nawel Houch,
Yes.
if I pronounce this correctly. She is actually one of our students and in the public governance master. And I should say she's one of our very talented and bright students because she passed the course with a great mark, my course. So she's currently doing courses as part of the master program. She is also a chair of the
Pre-master.
model. Sorry?
Pre-master.
So
I'm
yeah,
going
it's a
to
pre-master,
go
but
for the
yeah,
masters.
we assume you make the pre-master and you make it into the master.
Yeah.
She's chairing the model European Parliament in Limburg. It is right.
Yeah.
And you've been an intern at the European Parliament,
Yeah,
so the
indeed.
European Parliament is well represented here tonight. For another political party, though, Jeroen Leenaars, he's a
Yes, European
CDA,
People's
Christian
Party.
Democrat, yeah, European People's Party. And she, in fact, already contributed to the debates about the future of Europe, to the conference on the future of Europe. And she was a participant in a European People's Party event,
Mhm.
online event, which you can all view still. And she actually shared her ideas, vision on the future of Europe, and she has really ideas and visions, a vision about this, and that's why we have her here. So after maybe she has added something which I've forgotten, I'd like to hear from Nawal about a totally different topic in a way, but also in a way also a similar topic. We discussed the Green Deal, the EU's ambitions, its mission when it comes to climate change and the energy transition. The EU is also very active in the digitalization area and in the digital economy and in what relates to that, media, social media, etc., and the regulation thereof. Also a priority of the current Commission. And Nawal has done research on this and would like to share some ideas, opinions, viewpoints, perspectives on this. And then, as we did before the break, feel free to engage in this discussion, pose questions, questions for clarification, critical questions, and then we'll try to have them answered here.
Yes.
But Nawal, the floor is yours. So maybe was my introduction correct? Did I miss anything?
Yes, I can elaborate on it. I actually was a participant in the Model European Parliament project in Limburg. This was when I was a high school student, so that was my first experience with getting in touch with the European Parliament, because it was a conference, a simulation of the European Parliament. And after that, I never stopped enhancing with the European Parliament or EU projects. So I got into the foundation itself, and now I am the chairwoman actually of the foundation in Limburg. And we organize conferences like the simulation of the European Parliament, but also trips to, for example, Frankfurt for the European Central Bank, Strasbourg to visit the Council, etc. Indeed, I did the internship at the European Parliament, and that's also where I want to introduce my topic about the digital transition. We just discussed climate transition and energy transition, and now I would like to introduce another one. Why this topic? A year ago, I got in touch during a committee, what was it? It was a committee event on this topic, and there was a briefing on artificial intelligence. What is it? It's actually quite interesting because it's a technology which is able to learn from itself. For example, an abstract thing, if you say to a toddler, well, that's a bird, and you say, yes, that's a bird, or no, that's not a bird, that's also a manner of how artificial intelligence can learn from itself. I deepened in this technology thing, but mainly about facial recognition technology. And I don't want to make it too technical, so I'm going to introduce the political part of this. which is on one hand actually the innovation that Europe needs to have to compete with big players as the United States, but also China. And on the other hand, they have the EU citizens that they need to protect, not only their freedoms when it comes to privacy, but also to gain trust for the policy. And that's not only the case when it comes to digitalization, that's also for other policies, as the climate change policies we just discussed. So what I think why this should happen on an EU level is actually because technology is something that comes along with data. AI and FRT, facial recognition technology, is something that's could be very useful, but could also be very harmful. And something that you need to have a success story is good data. If you put good data in it, you'll get good results from it. And if you don't, you won't get good results, and you could cause harm to people. So here's a discussion about how far should we go to use these limitations. For the other debate, it was more like, we need to innovate and create new technologies to stimulate the climate transition. Here it is, where are we going to limit it? So it's a reverse story. Europe did an approach, a European approach, a very challenging one. They tried to regulate artificial intelligence, something that is challenging because EU is actually lagging behind when it comes to such technologies in comparison to China and the US. And if you look at China, for example, they really have a credit system where you get points for jaywalking in some cities, or you could even punished by not paying. You could be punished by not getting a plane ticket or a train ticket or something. The US is another story because of the different states. There are different rulings. California is, for example, quite strict on it. They prohibit certain FRT applications, but there are also states that say, no, we want to use it to combat criminal activities, for example. My research was about, what should Europe do about this? I think it could be very useful when it comes, for example, a missing child, and that's also what the EU now introduced. I think this year in April or May, they published a digital compass on how should we approach digitalization and how can we regulate it. The plan still needs to be discussed, and that's actually also a thing which I found quite tricky, because the technology is enhancing and it's getting used, but there's no regulation used to control this. And I think that's very important, that it is going to happen on a short notice to prevent people from harm, but also to use the technology for good ends.
Mm-hmm. Okay, wow, great, thanks for this introduction to this another very interesting topic. I do have a question to start with. You referred to the US, where there's various approaches to this, right? So you say, well, there's states that are more relaxed, that allow more room for maneuver for innovation, etc., that regulate less. Mm-hmm. So apparently there's no one US approach, right? So why should there be one European approach?
Well, the European approach is important also as wanting to be the first one to set certain standards. Mm-hmm. That's not only when it comes to digitalization policy. The EU also really wants to do this when it comes to climate, mm-hmm. to data, etc. So they want to be one step ahead, so they can set a standard for the whole world. And that's also a good thing about wanting to regulate such technologies, even if it is very challenging, because it's a bargaining tool. You can set some standards, and you can also make the world better outside of the EU.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So standard setting, something that Mohammed also referred to, and mm-hmm. Being the EU as a regulatory power vis-a-vis other countries, other blocs in the world. I'm looking at Max. Do we have a question from the audience?
Yes, we have a question. The question is by Rudolf. He asked, do you think AI, like deepfakes, have already been used in EU spheres?
I certainly think it's getting used, but they're also the same story. Like, it's not that they want to immediately prohibit deepfakes in the EU, but it needs to be regulated. Where can we use it? Where not? Where draw we a line between what's okay and what's not? And from the research I've done, I think there are three basic rules for such technologies. I applied it to facial recognition technology, but it could also be for other upcoming technologies. And that's the legitimacy, the proportionality, and the safeguards of the checks and balances where you could regulate such technologies with. So I think that's the same case for deepfakes, which should be high on the agenda of digitalization in the EU.
Mm-hmm. So regulation, and you refer to this, well, there's potential harm that could be done through AI, and then there's regulation. Why would the EU be best placed to come up with this legislation, and why not at other levels? I mean, you could also think actually at the global level even,
Mm-hmm.
no? So UN or so.
Yeah, well, 27 member states is already quite challenging.
Mhm.
We've seen that. But why the EU and not a national level? I think that's simple to answer, because we already have the GDPR, for example, on European level. There are a lot of data legislation on European level. But also, if you want to fight big companies, tech companies as Facebook and Google, we won't be able to do that on national levels. And for these companies itself, it's also more useful to have like clear legislation, clear regulation for them to say here we draw the line and no further than a vague regulation that differs from member state to member state.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So you refer to these big players, big tech, right? And we also know that in the EU is very powerful in the area of competition policy. So a lot of the EU's actions go through competition policies, right? So if we would want to regulate some of these parties, would an AI regulation, which is prone to be outdated as soon as you publish it, would that be the most fitting type of regulation? Or could you also do this in other ways through regulating competition, make sure that that you stimulate the market to regulate itself in a way? Could that be
well, the difficult thing here is that AI covers several subjects.
Mm-hmm.
So not only the competition policy, which is of course a likely one, but it could also be justice and security. And that's actually for facial recognition, for example, like the easiest comedy or subject to use AI, because it's more criminal related, terrorism related. So you could look for criminal law collaboration into that. But for what did you mention already?
I refer to
the competition policy. Yeah. Well, with regards to the competition policy, there is a great responsibility for example, Facebook, because they have such a big platform with a lot of EU citizens and global citizens on it, and that's not only for disinformation, for example, it's also an issue. So I think they wrote a code on it. I think there's something, a space for collaborating with tech companies, and the good thing is that they are trying to work on it. It's not that easy always, because they don't want to be that transparent or something, but first start has been made.
Okay, I think we have another question.
We have a question by Chris. Don't you think allowing these technologies at all is a slippery slope that doesn't end well?
Okay, so before you answer it, so we want to have questions from other people as well, not only from Chris and Rudolf. So if there are more people watching, obviously, if it's only Chris and Rudolf, feel free to answer to pose more questions. But so don't hesitate, pose your question. You can also say your name is Martin if you don't if you want to do it anonymized, right? But Noel.
Yeah. I understand this statement because it's quite tricky, but think also of the good applications of such technologies. For example, when a child is missing or a terrorist attack is getting planned and there are like certain signs that there must be an attack at that place. But it's also quite interesting to think about the application of technologies when it comes to riots, for example. We've seen the COVID-19 measures and the riots in the Netherlands, and it was actually quite hard to catch these people, to just fix the damage they have done to our cities. Well, is it legitimate to use facial recognition to track down these people? These are interesting questions to pose to use the advantages of facial recognition technology.
Yeah. So you say, well, you don't want to stifle innovation because it can have potentially a good, it can be used for the good, but you do want to make sure it's not being used in a harmful way. So in this type of very swiftly moving policy areas, right? So AI, in the 20 minutes we've been talking, probably there's another innovation there, right? So at least that is, how it's put, how it seems it works. So is the EU, is it flexible enough? Is it swift enough? Because we also know that it takes quite a while to come up with legislation, that implementation is an issue. So is it all worth it?
Well, that's the thing. I also just mentioned like it can take years before we get to a result of such legislation, and that's a tricky thing when it comes to EU level and EU decision making. However, the knowledge and the practices, like the power itself, is on the EU level. So if you want to do something with it, we need to do something on the EU level. Doing nothing is also doing something. So you choose to lag behind everything. And the EU has spoken about an autonomous approach or strategy, and of course it's great to hear that. But if it's reality, well, we could consider that. With regards to China and the US, it remains quite challenging. But striving for it is a good thing, I think, because that makes the EU being a player on a global field. And if you want to use the standards and bargaining or norms and values and safeguard them, then we should continue with these practices.
Yeah, we referred to standards a couple of times now, also externally. So in this area, I mean, I think when it comes to trade or so, it matters, right? You can set standards because others will abide by those standards because they want to trade with you. But when it comes to artificial intelligence and countries like China and so on, will they follow our European standards? Will that be something they care about at all?
I think apart from that, it's also an internal thing, right? You want to protect your customers, your citizens. They also mentioned in a digital compass they wanted to educate business people to digitalize businesses in the EU, and not only for trade but also like just going to your work and being able to do your thing. It is necessary to catch up with this digitalization trend. At first hand, I would say it should be prioritized for the EU citizens itself to protect them.
So the other external effects are like great if that happens, but if not, then too bad.
Of course, it remains an important thing, especially for the EU. But I just wanted to show also like the other side of it. It's not only like we want to catch up with the United States and China. It also really is an internally thing.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have another question? No, Chris and Rudolf have had all their questions answered. Yeah. And I do expect all those students watching that have taken part in Introduction to European Governance or Transboundary and Multi-Level Governance to pose a question, obviously. So for bonus points in the. No, so we discussed earlier on for the Green Deal that there's a lot of responsibility also for the central state level, for regions, for cities, etc. But this is totally different ball game. This is something happening in cyberspace, etc. Right? So is there any role here if we have EU legislation and implementation thereof? Is there any role for the nation state? Any role for cities, or how does that? Or is that? Don't they have a role to play here?
Yeah, I believe that the national states are actually the ones who are accountable to practice these, to execute the law, which is getting to them. But that's also a difficult thing because we have seen for the GDPR, for example, on national level, that's been an issue. Not every member state is implementing it at the same manner, the same way. And people are guessing that this will be the same for the legislation which is now on the table for AI. So that remains the thing.
Okay. So we have a question? Yeah.
Yes, I think there's clearly someone who wants some bonus points.
Yeah.
A question from Julian.
Okay, I'll write it down. Yeah.
With respect to digitalization of money, do you see a future for integration of cryptocurrency technologies at an EU scale?
Okay, so...
good question.
No.
Well, I must confirm that I'm not really deep into cryptocurrencies. I just downloaded the app, but I didn't buy any of them yet. But I don't know. Maybe Mr. Groenleer knows
you
more
pass
about
it to me.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on cryptocurrencies. I am a bit of an expert on cyber, and there I really cryptocurrencies play an important role in our current market system, but also in the criminal market system. So from that perspective, it's and I know there's quite a bit of collaboration at the EU level. So all the potentially harmful effects of using cryptocurrencies for illegal transactions, etc., and drug trafficking and things like that. So I know there is collaboration ongoing. I know that among the member states that it's partly being coordinated by the EU at the EU level. But when it concerns crime, but maybe member states, increasingly collaborate at the EU level, but still find it difficult. So they oftentimes do it bilaterally or with a couple of countries that are front runners in such areas. So that from a non-expert, an answer for your question, Julian. Another question? Yeah.
We have one last question before we go to the end discussion. A question from Sven. Do you feel the EU should also set standards for state use of AI, or should that be up to the member states themselves?
Yeah, very good question. I mean, we're talking about regulating market parties here, but will states, will they let them regulate, will they let the EU regulate them, or the EU level commission?
You could say like we have certain directions, and from this point it's not possible to implicate or make use of AI, and then say to the member states, okay, if you want to put a ban on it for this purpose or this purpose because it's not in line with your national morals and values. I think that is a type of diversity within the EU that we're a space for.
Okay, thanks for that answer. I think Mohammed will join us again, and we go to a third round immediately, right, without a break. So okay. So we have a third round where we basically bring the two speakers, their stories together, and wrap up a bit when it comes to the future of Europe. So what does this tell us about the future of Europe, how it could potentially look like? I think we heard from Mohammed and Nawal about two current priority areas of the European Union, where a lot is happening, a lot of regulation or legislation is produced, a lot of negotiations and bargaining is taking place. So maybe I'll just pose the first question to Mohammed. Listening to Nawal's story, what do you recognize? What do you think is similar when it comes to the work you do with regard to the EU Green Deal?
I mean, I think digital is one of the other topics where at least I think on the EU level is a big enough level to really create counterpower to these big tech companies. And although it's not my topic, I am interested in it because of it is part of our industry policies. And currently, besides of the GDPR, we are working on the two major legislations. One is called the Digital Market Act, and the other one is called the Digital Service Act. And of course, I do believe that ethical AI will play a bigger role, and I do believe that. I mean, it will be also from a geopolitical point of view. I think the EU has to stand against countries like Russia, China, the technology that they use to spy on us, to use fake videos or deep fake technologies. I mean, this will play a major role in the future, I believe. We have to counter that. We have to identify it faster. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, we saw that in the Dutch Parliament there was a deep fake video of a Russian opposition leader. I think that's very harmful for our democracy if we allow those things to happen to us. So we have to counter that with our own intelligence, our own people. So again, I think the two things in common is these are global problems where we, as on the EU level, have the minimal size to affect change to the rest of the world, but also to the EU on itself. I think these two topics are very clear. I think migration is maybe another one where we have to set on clear agreements on the EU level, where we also show solidarity with the bordering EU member states. I mean, these three topics, I think.
Would you agree? These are the three topics that should be priority topics, or would you add another?
Well, I know that migration was already a thing years ago, and they were trying to make a deal on it a year ago when I was at the parliament, and now we still don't have a deal on it. And you have the coronavirus and the climate change, digitalization. But I do think these are the main topics for now.
So let's say let's talk about the possible future outlooks for the EU, because that's also what this conference is about. And let's avoid the discussion about adding competences or stuff like that, but really so what should the EU look like? So if I hear you both, it's not muddling through. It's not like carrying on as we did before. If I hear you, it's really focus on a couple of areas and do that very well. Or is that perhaps doing less even, but more effectively and more efficiently, and then perhaps hopefully also more legitimately?
I do believe that I think we need more democratization. I mean, we have an elected parliament that has no right of initiative, so we cannot initialize our own legislation. We have some, as the EU always finds a kind of solution, so we have this initiative reports that of course have approximately the same characteristic but not the same weight. But I do believe, I'm not a federalist, so for me it's very important to solve the issues on the level that they need to be solved at. And sometimes it requires collaboration between levels. So it's very difficult for me to say, okay, let's not, for example, healthcare is a national competence, so don't get involved EU, and then coronavirus hit us. And then we saw that, maybe we made a mistake there, but we at least need some kind of collaboration, some kind of working together, etc. So I do not know what the future will bring. I think we should work on topics where we can improve, where basically the adding the two individuals separately is bigger than the addition. So the working together is bigger than working being separate from each other. So so where there's added value. And again, we are Europe, so Europe is not some kind of invisible hand. So when we do something on the EU level, we are doing it together. It's not happening to us. We are involved in it. I think that's a very important thing we have to change in the public opinion in the Netherlands. There's a too negative association with the EU, but that's basically looking in the mirror and saying what I see is something that I don't like. I mean, that's you. So either change it and get involved, or stop nagging, because nagging doesn't bring you anything.
I suppose you agree here.
Yeah.
Is there anything what you heard Mohammed saying also before and about his future outlook for the EU? Is there anything you say? Well, I have a slightly different opinion there.
Well, there are two things. What the EU should do to to further in the processes they are already on. But the thing which I might find more important is the involvement of the citizens itself, of the Dutch citizens, for example. Well, I'm involved within Model European Parliament, so everyone who's participating on our programs might be not that enthusiastic about the EU at all at the beginning, but after they know and learn more about the EU, they're getting to know like how does it work, what can we do, how can I participate, and that's a good thing. But for the rest of the country, it's really maybe about a journalist thing that there's something missing from EU information going to the member state information, and then I'm talking about the Netherlands from the Dutch perspective. If you see what's in the news in the Netherlands, it's barely something on EU level, for example, on things that are now on the table in the EU and after a few years are coming to the EU citizens or to the Dutch citizens itself. If, for example, the GDPR law, which already was being discussed on EU level, and after that it came to a referendum in the Netherlands, and people were like, no, I want my privacy. I don't want to vote in favor of this law. If there's like something, a better information provision, if it's through journalists or through education or whatsoever, or foundations, it would help to also create trust in the EU, to create trust in yourself, the thing where you have voted for, and the thing you want to work on. Because the Netherlands itself, like, it has an internal market, and it's an open internal, it has an open market, but on itself, it can barely like get to something, and it does. Yeah, it needs the European Union to get to somewhere to stand for the climate change, to stand for digitalization, etc.
Can I add something on that? Because it's a very interesting point. If we look at the number of correspondents, journalists at the European Union, then I think the Netherlands has the lowest representation of almost all EU countries. It's something very serious. If you look at the Dutch public television, they have approximately 2 and 2.5 correspondents, journalists in the EU that have to cover all these areas, all committees, all different legislations, which is really complex. If I compare that to the number of people they have in the Hague, it's between 30 and 60. If you believe that the EU is very important and comes with a lot of legislation that will affect us on a day-to-day basis, I do believe that I think there's also a task to not only politicians to explain it in an easy way and in a way that people understand it, because I do believe that politicians should not be technocrats, should also try to explain it in normal words. But also I believe that the representation, which is also a fundamental part of democracy as the fourth power, the media, that they also should be present and report and question, and not only when there's a scandal in the EU, when some type of commissioner or whatever does something with fraud. I mean, these things happen, or when the Netherlands is present at the council and don't want to pay another dime to the EU, as if the EU again is something that we're not part of. Those are the moments you see many journalists from the Netherlands driving in their car to Brussels to represent or to write, to make a report as we know it. But no one asks me to have a debate on, for example, I mean, I've been fighting this corona crisis for months and months and months.
I have questions about this so I will ask you.
Okay.
I'm not a journalist though, but so if I listen to you carefully, your future outlook for the EU is not so much changing all kinds of things at the EU level, but it starts very much at the national level with national politicians telling an honest story, assuming leadership on issues. It's about journalists taking their job seriously and not only report on what's happening in The Hague.
Sometimes it's more effective to do things on a national level.
Yeah. So this is so for the future of Europe. It's not a future without the member states.
No.
It's definitely something different than Schuman. We mentioned him before. Was perhaps thinking back then, 71 years ago. When some big union or so without member states, we realized we need the member states, and this is also what I hear you saying. Suppose that there's issues where some member states want to go faster, further than others, right? So maybe these issues. So how important is it to do this all together with the 27?
So for me, there are some changes I think we need. I mean, when it comes to EU legislation, I do believe that the Council has way too much power and position. So I do think we need to democratize that a little bit.
Increase the
more.
role of the Parliament. Yeah, we would
Not
not expect you
not
to say
only the
differently.
European Parliament, but also the
Mhm.
national parliaments.
Yeah.
I think national parliament should be able to amend treaties or agreements. Sometimes they don't have any position in the forming of certain
Mhm.
agreements. So and then it's a zero-sum game. Either they approve it or they disapprove it. I do believe that we should rethink about improving the strength of national, but also the European Parliament in this decision process.
Okay, so we have national politicians, we have national journalists, we have members of Dutch Parliament and all of the other parliaments, right?
Yeah.
Strengthening their position. Okay. So, but my question about countries that want to go faster or slower, and how important is to do it all together, to do it with the 27?
I mean, it really depends again on the type of legislation. So, for example, when it comes to climate change, I mean, I have no issue of countries becoming climate neutral tomorrow. That doesn't affect us at all. So, if they are doing better than what is required, there's nothing going against that.
But it
I
probably
think
will be the other way around.
The opposite. That's an issue. And then again, from a solidarity point of view, we should see how we can help them. At the end of the day, we have this principle of the EU where we want to converge as much as possible to societies that look alike, from a healthcare point of view, from a wealth point of view, from an economic point of view. So we not only have an internal market, sometimes, I mean, there's also a financial market. So we want to look alike. We want to have, if you live in Bulgaria, I mean, someday in the future should be approximately the same as living in the Netherlands from a living standard perspective. That's this convergence principle.
Mm-hmm. Economically, socially, perhaps not culturally. I guess.
Exactly. On all points.
Well, not culturally. I guess.
Even culturally,
Okay.
to a certain extent. I think in the EU we have certain. I mean, the equality between men and women, respecting the LGBTQI community. I mean, these are, I think, European values that we should
That
not.
some countries.
I mean, some countries
disagree
are
with.
radicalizing there, but I don't think that's accepted. That we should accept that
Okay.
as EU citizens, whether you're Dutch or
Okay.
Romanian. But this convergence really means that if a country is lagging or getting behind, we should think of ways to help them, because at the end of the day, that's also in our benefit.
Okay. Well,
Well, luckily the EU gives the opportunity to enhance certain policies, and of course, what Mohammed said, it's in a positive way and not in a negative way. Could be a solution for like striving for it, but I also like want to pose a question to Mohammed, because in the Netherlands, for example, we've seen the emissions, the carbon emissions, and they put an extra thing on it. So the Dutch companies needed to pay more for their carbon emissions, and we also have this thing on EU level. But yeah, where does it stop? Because we have like a border. How do you see it's fair, for example, for such Dutch companies to pay extra for the same thing than another company which is like 5 kilometers ahead across the border.
So these are plans, so they're not in effect.
No, they're
yet.
introduced indeed.
Yeah, they want to introduce it. I don't think they are necessary. At the end of the day, I think if we can solve it on EU level, I think that's the level we should solve it on. But there are countries that already have also a national CO2 additional tax, like the UK, and I mean that's their choice. What I do see is that the UK has decreased their emissions by 40%. If we compare that to the Netherlands, there we have decreased by 20%. And at the end of the day, the reason behind the CO2 tax is not to punish companies. We want them to be innovative, to improve their technological standards. That's the idea behind it. And then, indeed, in the beginning, it's a bit tough and hard, but then you are one of the leaders technologically, which means that your competitiveness compared to the rest of the world has improved. And that's also something we should strive.
Okay, let me check. But do we have a question? Yeah, 2 questions. Yeah, just pose them.
The first question. Don't you think that the lack of coverage by Dutch journalists of EU matters is simply a case of supply and demand, because Dutch citizens are maybe not very interested?
Okay, so it's not a very open question, but yeah, and the second question, let's do it.
The distance or lack of representation of the Netherlands within Europe, do you think that the new and upcoming generation will try to lessen this gap through newly European-focused education?
Okay, so let me, the first one's for Mohammed and the second one's for Nawal, and then let me, Nawal, can you take the second question, because I think you were already making...
I would like to answer that question actually. I do believe so, not only because I'm seeing it in my own generation, but also when you look at the elections on national level of the Netherlands, that vote that came into the parliament, like
exactly.
So more people and more students are getting interested in the EU and are seeing like the advantages of it. So I do believe in a brighter future when it comes to that.
Okay, and whilst there is increasing debate also, when I was taking classes on EU integration, everyone's like, yeah, that's a good thing. But now in my classes we have debate, people differ of, some people think it's going too fast and too far, others think it should be less. But that's also good, I think.
It's good to be critical, indeed. You could prize it, but it's even better to be critical on it and to discuss something on EU level.
Yeah, great, thanks. So supply, demand, so people just aren't interested in the EU and it's never going to happen.
I think other countries show the opposite.
Ireland.
Many EU countries have a different perspective on this European project, and I also believe that, I mean, let's assume it's a demand and supply market. Let's say news is like Netflix, and EU News is a new coming series or a type of series on Netflix. If it's not there, then you cannot watch it. And I think we are in the situation where a lot of information is not even there. So it's not even up to consumers to choose whether they want it or not. And I don't believe that news should be a demand and supply thing. I do believe that, again, news, journalists have an important position in the democracy. And we need to make sure that journalists are there to check the work of politicians, whether they are doing the things that they've promised to do and whether they do it in a fair way. I don't expect consumers to be able to do that on a day-to-day basis. That's why we need journalists. And maybe we should look in a new business model where we really, again, appreciate journalism from that perspective. And you see new upcoming platforms like Follow the Money, The Correspondent, different type of research journalists where they really dig into certain topics. It takes some months sometimes to get certain information to the surface, but I do believe that there is a trend going on also there. But for me, as a Dutch politician in the European Parliament, sometimes it's easier to get a quote in like an Italian, a German, or even a British newspaper than in the Dutch ones, and then I don't think it's a lack of interest of consumers. I also believe that it's impossible for the current correspondents to tackle all fields, and there's a lot going on with 705 members in Parliament with all different committees, with all legislation and directive to be covered by a handful of journalists. I think that's also a big issue.
Thank you. I think there's, I still have a lot of questions, but I think we're wrapping up here. And there's, at the end of my classes, I now always have the question basically, and what does it mean for COVID and so on. I think we're all fed up with COVID, and I think we can conclude that the EU is not simply disintegrating as we may have thought a year ago, right? So it's the end of the EU. So, but what we exactly see with COVID, we don't know. So maybe we'll invite you back at some point to discuss that.
Yes.
And let's await some of these developments. I think you've introduced to us two very interesting issues that are not only on the agenda of the at the EU level, but are also there's important decisions that have been made with important implications also for implementation at the national level. We discussed the politics of it. We discussed also the public side of things. I think one important conclusion is also that I think we could draw is that the EU is not merely out there, or should not be merely out there. I think this was also my point at the beginning, and you confirmed that it's an integrated part of our system. We should look at it like that. And for Green Deal, climate change, energy transition, AI, digitalization. There's no way we, as the Netherlands, can do without the EU. Things can perhaps improve, can be strengthened, but the only way you do that is, the way you do it, by, as a member of European Parliament, posing questions, pushing for certain things, or you studying it, studying certain topics and themes, posing also critical questions about it, but at the same time telling an honest story, what is being achieved, etc. So great, it was great having you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also great having you tell a bit of a optimistic, in a way positive story, whereas usually you can get into all kinds of negative and pessimist kind of stories about the EU. I don't think we have to be. You've shown that it's definitely not necessary. I really enjoyed it. I hope Rudolf and Chris enjoyed it as well. And all the other 500,000 people watching this prime time live from the Lock Hall. So we wrap up here. I think the team, you don't see the team, but the team is sitting there. I thank Juribes for organizing this. I think a great event, great initiative, and there will be many more events like this also on the EU and the future of the EU, so stay tuned. Thank you, have a nice evening, and see you back soon, maybe even in my class next week. Bye bye.